Hello, everyone. Welcome to podcast channel. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe. Enjoy the show. I used to live for the exhilaration of the race. Back in high school, I was the track team star, a sprinter with lightning fast legs and a heart that beat solely for the finish line. The cheers from the crowd, the rhythm of my feet pounding the track, and the rush of wind as I sped through the air, it was all electrifying. I felt unbeatable, or at least that's how it seemed. I dreamed of going pro, of racing at the Olympics, but life had other ideas. An injury in my final year dashed those dreams and set me on a new path, one that led me to Lily and ultimately to the life I lead now. It's odd how the past feels so distant, as if it belongs to someone else. The glory, the adrenaline, it all faded into the background, replaced by the steady beat of a 9-to-5 job, bills, and family responsibilities. These days, the only races I run are with my kids in the backyard, and even then, I let them win most of the time. Today was one of those rare perfect days. We decided to take the kids to the mall, a frequent outing when we needed to get out of the house and let them burn off some energy. The mall was buzzing with activity, as it usually is on a Saturday. The air was filled with laughter, chatter, and the distant sound of mall music. The kids were thrilled, practically dragging us from one store to the next, pointing out every shiny toy and colorful display that caught their eye. As we wandered through the mall, I couldn't help but feel a pang of nostalgia. Although I'm no longer the sprinter I once was, seeing my kids run around full of life reminded me of those days when nothing could slow me down. They've inherited my competitive spirit, always challenging each other to races, games, and contests. Today was no exception. At one point, as we passed a store selling sports gear, my son Jacob challenged his younger sister Emma to a race to the next store. They took off like a shot, their laughter echoing through the mall. I watched them with a smile, and for a moment, I felt a familiar itch in my legs, a memory of my old competitive spirit. Without thinking, I sprinted after them, as if I were back on the track. Though I might have been slower than before, I was still quick enough to catch up. The look of surprise on their faces when I appeared beside them was priceless, wide eyes and dropped jaws as they realized their dad wasn't as slow as they thought. We all burst into laughter when I crossed the imaginary finish line just ahead of them, claiming victory. "You cheated," Jacob protested, but he was grinning, his face flushed with excitement. Emma was too busy giggling to argue, simply enjoying the moment. "Never underestimate your old man," I said, ruffling Jacob's hair. "I've still got a few tricks up my sleeve." We continued our stroll, catching our breath as we moved on to the food court. The aroma of greasy food mingled with the sweetness of cinnamon rolls and the strong scent of freshly brewed coffee. The kids immediately headed for the fast food options, eyes lighting up at the sight of burgers, fries, and the inevitable ice cream stand. While they debated pizza versus chicken nuggets, Lily and I found a table near the corner, away from the chaos but close enough to keep an eye on them. She seemed distracted, her gaze wandering as she observed the crowd. I tried to engage her in conversation about the kids and our plans for the rest of the day, but she was only half listening, giving short answers and nodding absently. I noticed her fingers tapping lightly on the table, a sign that something was on her mind. I'd seen that look before, but I didn't want to press. Maybe she was just tired, or maybe something else was bothering her. I told myself not to overthink it, to simply enjoy the day, but that nagging doubt. The back of my mind wouldn't go away. The rest of the day at the mall unfolded as it always did, a mix of small pleasures and minor frustrations that came with herding two energetic kids through a crowded place. We moved from store to store, stopping to admire window displays or letting the kids test out some gadget that caught their eye. I played the role of the patient dad, lifting Emma up so she could see a stuffed animal on a high shelf or holding Jacob's hand as he tried to convince me to buy him yet another action figure. But through all the noise and activity, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off with Lily. She was present physically, but her mind seemed somewhere else entirely. I caught her glancing at her phone more often than usual, her face tight with some unspoken concern. Once, while the kids were busy at a game store, I leaned in close, trying to catch her eye. "Everything all right?" I asked, keeping my tone light. You seem a bit distracted. She looked up at me, her expression unreadable for a moment before she forced a smile. I'm fine, just thinking about some stuff at work. You know how it is. It was a plausible excuse, one I would have accepted without a second thought on any other day. But today, there was something in the way she said it that made me uneasy. It was too quick, too rehearsed, like she had been waiting for me to ask before. I could press further. The kids came running over excitedly, pulling us toward the next attraction on their list, the pet store. Lilia's smile grew more genuine as she watched them chatter about puppies and kittens, and I let the moment pass. Maybe I was just imagining things, maybe it was just work stress, like she said. The pet store was one of the kids' favorite spots in the mall. They could spend hours there, gazing over the animals and begging us to take one home. As soon as we walked in, they made a beeline for the rows of glass enclosures, their faces lighting up as they pointed out their favorites. Jacob was enamored with a fluffy golden retriever puppy that wagged its tail every time he got close, while Emma was completely taken by a tiny kitten with big, curious eyes. They took turns naming the animals, coming up with the most ridiculous and endearing combinations: Fluffy Butt, Sir Snugglesworth, Captain Paw. I couldn't help but laugh at their creativity, the earlier tension momentarily forgotten. Lily stood beside me, watching the kids with a small, fond smile. For a moment, she looked like her old self, relaxed, happy, content. I wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close as we watched Jacob and Emma play. She leaned into me, but I noticed how her body remained tense, like she was holding something back. You sure you're okay? I asked again, this time more quietly so the kids wouldn't overhear. She hesitated, her eyes flicking toward the kids before meeting mine. I'm fine, she said more firmly this time. I promise. Let's just enjoy the day, all right? I wanted to believe her, so I did. We stayed at the pet store for a while longer, letting the kids get their fill of puppy and kitten antics. I even caught Lily laughing a few times as Emma tried to convince us that the kitten needed to come home with us. It was moments like these that made everything else fade into the background, the joy on my kids' faces, the warmth of my wife by my side. But as we left the store and continued our way through the mall, that nagging feeling returned, stronger than before. It was like a shadow hanging over us, something I couldn't quite see but could definitely feel. Lily's phone buzzed again, and she quickly pulled it from her pocket, glancing at the screen with a frown. She turned away slightly as she typed out a quick response, her fingers moving swiftly over the keyboard. I pretended not to notice, focusing instead on Jacob, who was now trying to climb onto one of those coin-operated rides that dotted the mall. Dad, can I ride it? He asked, already halfway onto the giant plastic spaceship. Sure, buddy, I said, reaching into my pocket for some change. I fed the coins into the slot and watched Jacob's face light up as the ride began to move. I felt Lily's eyes on me. I turned to her, but she was already looking away, her expression hidden from view. It was then that I realized just how far the distance between us had grown. It hadn't happened overnight, it was more of a slow drift, like two boats tied together gradually pulling apart as the ropes frayed. I didn't know when it had started, but now I could feel it, that space between us that had once been filled with laughter, conversation, and touch, now replaced by something colder, something distant. I watched as she walked over to the nearest bench, sitting down with her phone still in hand. The kids were oblivious, too caught up in their excitement to notice anything wrong, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was going on, it was about to change everything. The day had gone smoothly, but there was an undercurrent of tension that I just couldn't shake. After the kids had spent what seemed like hours in the arcade, racking up tickets and choosing their prizes, we started to make our way back through the mall. The excitement from earlier had faded, and I noticed Lily growing quieter and more distant with each passing minute. As we walked, I tried to engage her, pointing out stores we used to visit when we first started dating, hoping to draw her into a conversation, but she only offered half-hearted responses. The kids, oblivious to the tension between us, were happily clutching their prizes, a toy car for Jacob and a sparkly bracelet for Emma, chatting about what they'd do with them when they got home. We were heading toward the exit when Lily suddenly stopped, looking around as if she was searching for something. Her hand tightened around mine, and she forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Why don't we take a quick bathroom break before we head out?" she suggested, her voice oddly strained. I hesitated for a moment, glancing down at the kids who were clearly ready to go home, but before I could suggest otherwise, Lily was already leading us toward the restrooms, her grip on my hand firm, almost insistent. The restrooms were located in a quieter, more secluded area of the mall, away from the noise and crowds. As we approached, I felt a strange sense of unease wash over me. The area was dimly lit, and the bustling energy of the mall seemed to fade into an eerie stillness. I glanced at Lily, who was walking ahead, her posture tense, her eyes fixed straight ahead. "We'll be quick," she said over her shoulder, her tone more of a statement than a suggestion. When we reached the restrooms, the kids went into the family restroom together, laughing as they talked about their day. I followed Lily into the men's room, where she stood by the sinks, looking into the mirror. I could see the reflection of her face, pale, eyes darting to the door as if she was waiting for something. I stepped up beside her, trying to catch her gaze. "Lily, are you sure everything's all right? You've been acting different." She turned to me, finally meeting my eyes, but there was something unreadable in her expression. "I'm fine," she said too quickly before turning back to the mirror. "Just a lot on my mind." Before I could press further, the restroom door swung open with a loud bang, and two men stepped inside. They were big, much bigger than me, and the moment I saw them, I knew something was wrong. The air seemed to thicken with tension, and a cold knot of fear tightened in my stomach. "What the hell?" I muttered, stepping in front of Lily instinctively, but she didn't move, didn't even flinch. One of the men, a hulking figure with a shaved head and a wicked grin, spoke first. "Evening, sport. We've been expecting you." I turned to Lily, hoping to see shock or fear in her eyes, but all I saw was a strange mix of resignation and something darker, almost like guilt. My heart started to race as the pieces began to fall into place. This wasn't a random attack, this was planned. "Lily, what is this?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mix of confusion and anger. Before she could answer, the man's fist connected with my jaw, sending me crashing into the wall. Pain exploded through my skull, and I tasted blood. As I staggered, trying to stay on my feet, I reached out for support, but the second man was already on me, his knee driving into my stomach, knocking the wind out of me. As I crumpled to the floor, gasping for air, I looked up at Lily, desperate for an explanation, for anything that made sense of this nightmare. But she just stood there, her arms crossed over her chest, her face a mask of cold detachment. "I am sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the ringing in my ears, "but you left me no choice." The words hit me harder than the blows from the men, and I felt a deep, sickening sense of betrayal wash over me. My mind raced, trying to piece together what she meant, but all I could focus on was the pain, the physical pain of the beating and the emotional pain of realizing that my wife, the woman I loved, had set me up. Another punch landed, and the world started to blur around the edges. I could hear the men laughing, their voices distorted, and Lily's soft, steady breathing as she stood over me, watching as I struggled to stay conscious. Everything began to fade, and the last thing I saw before darkness swallowed me was the cold, empty look in Lily's eyes. When I regained consciousness, the world was a blur of pain and confusion. The hard floor beneath me was cold against my cheek, and every part of my body throbbed with agony. My vision was hazy, my thoughts slow to form, as if I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. But then the memories began to flood back, the restroom, the attack, and Lily's cold, distant eyes. The reality of it all crashed down on me like a tidal wave, and I wished for the darkness to take me again. I tried to move, but my muscles screamed in protest. My ribs ached with every breath, and the taste of blood lingered in my mouth. Blinking hard, I forced myself to focus, to push past the pain. The fluorescent lights above flickered slightly, casting harsh, sterile light over the small, dingy restroom. I turned my head slowly, my neck stiff and sore, and saw Lily standing a few feet away, watching me with an expression that sent a chill down my spine. There was no warmth in her gaze, no concern, only a cold detachment that I couldn't reconcile with the woman I thought I knew. "Lily," I managed to croak out, my voice barely audible. "Why? Why are you doing this?" She knelt down beside me, her face expressionless, her eyes scanning my battered form as if assessing the damage. "I had to," she said quietly, her voice devoid of any emotion. "You left me no choice." The words cut through me like a knife. "No choice? Lily, what are you talking about? I haven't done anything, nothing to deserve this." Her lips pressed into a thin line, and she shook her head slowly. "Dante lied to me, Jack. I know about you and the neighbor. I have seen the way you look at her, the way you talk to her when you think I'm not watching. Did you really think I wouldn't notice?" The accusation hit me like another blow, but this time it was a different kind of pain, a sharp, piercing hurt that twisted deep inside my chest. "Lily, there's nothing going on between me and her. We've just talked, that's all. There's never been anything more. You have to believe me." But I could see in her eyes that she didn't. She had already made up her mind, and nothing I said would change that. "You expect me to believe that?" she spat, her voice trembling with barely restrained anger. "After all those times I saw you two together, the little smiles, the laughs. You think I'm stupid?" I felt a wave of desperation wash over me as I tried to sit up, my hands trembling as they pushed against the cold tiles. "Lily, please. You were wrong. We were just being friendly, just neighbors. I would never cheat on you." But my words seemed to bounce off her as if they meant nothing. She rose to her feet, her expression hardening, as if my denial only confirmed what she already believed. "Do you think I'm blind, Jack? Do you think I haven't noticed the way you've been distant, the late nights, the excuses? How long did you think you could string me along?" Her voice was rising now, the anger unmistakable, but there was also something else, a deep, festering hurt that had been building up inside her for who knows how long. All this time, I tried to ignore it, to tell myself I was imagining things, but I couldn't lie to myself anymore. "You've been sneaking around behind my back, and you think you can just stand there and deny it?" I shook my head, the frustration and helplessness clawing at me. "I'm not sneaking around. I've never cheated on you, Lily. I swear to you on everything we have built together, there's nothing between me and her. You're seeing things that aren't there." But my pleas fell on deaf ears. She stepped back, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, as if trying to hold herself together. "It's too late for that, Jack. I've seen enough to know you are lying, and I can't live like this anymore, wondering if every word you say is the truth or just another lie." Before I could say anything more, the restroom door swung open again with a loud creak, and the two men who had attacked me earlier stepped inside. The sight of them sent a jolt of terror through me, and I instinctively tried to back away, but my body was too weak, too battered to move. They were grinning, their eyes glinting with cruel satisfaction, and I knew with sickening certainty that this was far from over. One of the men stepped forward, cracking his knuckles as he looked me over like a predator sizing up its prey. "You ready for the next part, sweetheart?" he asked, glancing at Lily. She hesitated, her eyes flicking to me for the briefest moment. I could see a flicker of doubt in her expression, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by that same cold determination. She nodded. "No, no, please," I begged, my voice breaking as I struggled to get the words out. "Lily, you have to believe me. I have never betrayed you. I love you." But she only looked away, unable or unwilling to meet my eyes, as the men grabbed me and dragged me back to the floor. I fought them with every ounce of strength I had left, but it was no use. They were too strong, and I was too broken. Then the horror of what was about to happen fully hit me. This wasn't just about hurting me, this was about destroying everything, stripping me of any last shred of dignity. "Lily, don't do this," I whispered, my voice trembling with fear and heartbreak. "Please, I am begging you." But she remained silent, standing there like a statue as they forced me to watch, helpless and horrified, as the unimaginable unfolded before my eyes. There was a sickening inevitability to it all, as if this moment had been written in stone long before I even realized something was wrong. As the men violated her in front of me, I felt something inside me shatter into a million pieces. The sounds, the sight of it, the sheer brutality, it was more than I could bear. And yet, the worst part was the look on Lily's face, cold, detached, as if she had resigned herself to this, as if she believed this was the only way to make me understand. When it was finally over, I was left lying on the cold, hard floor, too broken to move, too shattered to think. The men left without a word, their job done, their cruelty spent. Lily stood there for a moment, looking down at me with an expression I couldn't read. Then she turned and walked out, leaving me alone in the darkness with nothing but the echo of my own shattered life. When I finally managed to drag myself off the cold restroom floor, every inch of my body screamed in pain. I leaned heavily against the sink, trying to steady myself, my hands trembling as I splashed cold water on my face. The reflection staring back at me was almost unrecognizable, a man beaten, bruised, and broken, both inside and out. The gravity of what had just happened weighed on me like a suffocating blanket, but there was no time to dwell on it. My kids, where were they? Stumbling out of the restroom, I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me, but I pushed it aside. My mind was racing, fueled by a sudden, overwhelming sense of panic. The kids were nowhere in sight. The arcade where we'd last been together was just ahead, but the noise, the flashing lights, it all felt so distant, so disconnected from the nightmare I'd just lived through. Lily! I called out, my voice hoarse and desperate. Jacob! Emma! But there was no response, no sign of them. I stumbled through the mall, searching frantically for any trace of them. My heart pounded in my chest, the pain from my injuries momentarily forgotten as the terror of losing my children took hold. I scanned the crowds, hoping to catch a glimpse of their familiar faces, but they were gone. The fear that had been gnawing at me since I woke up now exploded into full-blown panic. Lily! I shouted again, but all I got in return were puzzled looks from strangers passing by. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut, she'd taken them. She had taken the kids and disappeared, and I had no idea where they were or if they were safe. I pulled out my phone, my fingers shaking so badly I could barely manage to dial her number. It rang once, twice, then went straight to voicemail. Lily, where are you? Please, just tell me where the kids are. I need to know they're okay. My voice cracked with desperation as I left the message, but deep down, I knew she wasn't going to answer. She didn't want to be found. I stumbled out of the mall, my thoughts racing. The parking lot was a blur of cars and people, but none of them were her, none of them were my kids. I could feel the panic clawing at me, tightening its grip around my throat as I tried to think of where she could have gone. I had no idea where to start. She could be anywhere, and with each passing second, the distance between us grew wider, and the chances of finding them slimmer. I tried calling her again and again, but each time it went straight to voicemail. The helplessness I felt was suffocating. Finally, I stopped in the middle of the parking lot, taking a deep, shaky breath. I knew what I had to do, even if the thought of it twisted my insides. The damage was done, there was no going back to the life we had before. That life was over, and if she was capable of doing something this drastic, of putting our children through whatever was coming next, then I had to face the cold, hard truth, a divorce was inevitable. But this wasn't just about me or her anymore. It was about the kids. Whatever happened between us, I couldn't let her take them away from me. They were my world, and I'd fight for them with everything I had left. No matter how broken I was, no matter how hopeless it seemed, I couldn't let them become collateral damage in whatever war she was waging against me. I knew the road ahead was going to be long, painful, and full of battles I wasn't prepared for, but I couldn't afford to give up, not now, not when my kids were at stake. I'd hire the best lawyer I could find, gather whatever evidence I needed, and fight her in court if I had to. I took one last look around the parking lot, the reality of the situation settling in like a heavy weight on my shoulders. I had no idea where she'd gone, but I knew one thing for sure, I wasn't going to stop until I found them, until I brought my children back home. As I walked to my car, my body aching with every step, I felt a new resolve harden within me. Lily had made her choice, and now I had to make mine. I was going to fight for my kids, no matter what it took. I wouldn't let her take them away from me, not after everything we'd been through. I hurried out of the mall, each step sending jolts of pain through my battered body, but I couldn't let that slow me down. The midday sun was harsh, glaring off the cars in the parking lot as I frantically scanned the rows, searching for any sign of Lily. My heart raced as I darted between the vehicles, hoping against hope that I'd spot her before she could get too far. But as I reached the edge of the lot, it became clear she was gone. There was no sign of her car, no trace of where she'd gone. I fumbled with my keys, finally managing to unlock my own car. As I slid into the driver's seat, my hands shaking, I tried to think. First, I had to find out if she'd gone straight home. Maybe she'd taken the kids there, thinking she could regroup before I caught up. I started the engine and peeled out of the parking lot, driving faster than I should have, my mind racing as I navigated the familiar streets back to our neighborhood. The drive felt like an eternity, but finally, I turned onto our street. My eyes immediately locked onto our driveway, empty. My stomach twisted as I sped up, pulling into the driveway and slamming the car into park. I practically threw myself out of the car, sprinting to the front door and fumbling with my keys. I burst through the door, calling out their names, Jacob, Emma, Lily, but the house was eerily quiet, the only sound my own ragged breathing. I searched every room, my heart pounding in my chest, but there was no sign of them, no backpacks, no toys scattered in the usual spots. It was like they'd vanished. I grabbed my phone and started dialing anyone who might know where she could have gone, her friends, her parents. But with each call, the answer was the same, they hadn't seen or heard from her. My frustration grew with each dead end. She had planned this too well, covered her tracks too thoroughly. I paced the living room, trying to think of where she could have gone. The kids' school was out of the question, it was the weekend, and besides, she wouldn't risk being seen there. Her parents lived too far away to make it there in the time that had passed. That left only a few possibilities, places where she might think she could lay low until she figured out her next move. The neighbor. My blood ran cold at the thought. She was convinced there was something between us. So what if she'd gone there, thinking she could confront her? I bolted out the front door, running across the street and pounding on the neighbor's door. When she answered, the confusion on her face was clear. "Jack, what's going on?" "Lily," I panted, trying to catch my breath. "Is she here? Did she come by?" The neighbor shook her head, concern clouding her features. "No, I haven't seen her. Why would she?" But I was already turning away, muttering a quick apology before running back to my car. That lead was a dead end too, and time was slipping away. I couldn't afford to waste any more of it. There was one more place I could think of, the old cabin we used to visit, tucked away in the woods about an hour out of town. It was secluded, a place we hadn't been to in years, but maybe that's where she went. No one would think to look for her there. I jumped back into my car, gunned the engine, and headed for the highway. The drive was a blur, my knuckles white as I gripped the steering wheel. The road wound through dense forests, the trees casting long shadows as the sun began to dip toward the horizon. The cabin was isolated, a perfect place to disappear if that was her plan. As I pulled up to the dirt path that led to the cabin, I could see fresh tire tracks in the mud. My heart pounded in my chest as I followed the narrow road, the cabin finally coming into view. Her car was parked outside. I didn't waste any time, throwing the car into park and jumping out. The cabin loomed ahead, quiet and still, the air heavy with tension. I approached cautiously, not knowing what to expect. My mind was racing, replaying everything that had happened, but I forced myself to focus on the here and now. The front door was slightly ajar, creaking softly as I pushed it open. The interior was dim, the only light coming from the fading daylight outside. I could hear the faint sound of someone moving around, and I called out, my voice hoarse, "Lily?" There was no answer, but I followed the noise, my heart pounding in my ears. As I stepped into the main room, I saw her. Lily was standing by the window, her back to me, staring out at the woods. She didn't turn around as I approached, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. "Where are the kids?" I demanded, my voice rough with urgency. She finally turned to face me, her expression hard to read. "They were safe," she said quietly, but that only fueled my anger. "Safe? Where, Lily? Where did you take them?" "They are with a friend," she replied, her tone calm but resolute. "Somewhere you can't find them." I took a step closer, barely able to contain my frustration. "You can't just take them and run. This isn't how it works, Lily. We need to talk this through." Her eyes flashed with anger. "Talk like you talk to the neighbor?" "I am done talking, Jack. I'm done pretending everything is fine while you lie to me. There's nothing going on with the neighbor, Lily," I shouted, the frustration boiling over. "You were making this all up in your head." "Am I?" she shot back, her voice rising. "Then why were you always with her? Why were you sneaking around, keeping things from me?" "I wasn't sneaking around. We were just neighbors, just talking. You are the one who's been distant, who's been shutting me out. But this, taking the kids, you've gone too far." Lily's face hardened, her jaw set with determination. "Maybe I have, but I'm not letting you take them from me, not after everything you've done." Her words hung in the air like a death sentence. I realized that there was no reasoning with her, no convincing her of the truth. She was too far gone, too consumed by whatever demons she had been battling alone. But I wasn't going to give up, not on my kids. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "We're going to have to settle this in court, Lily. I'm not letting you take them away from me." She didn't respond, just turned back to the window, her shoulders tense, her silence speaking volumes. I knew this was just the beginning of a long, painful battle. As I stood there in the dim light of the cabin, I realized that the life we had known was truly over, shattered beyond repair. The only thing left to fight for now was the future of our children, and fight I would. The tension in the cabin was suffocating, the silence between us a thick, unbreakable wall. Lily kept her back to me, staring out the window as if the world beyond it held all the answers she was searching for. I knew there was no use trying to reason with her anymore. She had made up her mind, and nothing I could say would change it. But I couldn't walk away, not without knowing where my children were, not without making her understand that this was far from over. "Lily, look at me," I demanded, my voice low but firm. "You can't just run off with the kids. You're making a mistake. Think about what this will do to them." She didn't move, her gaze still fixed on the trees outside, her hands gripping the windowsill so tightly her knuckles were white. "I'm thinking about them, Jack," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am thinking about what's best for them. They deserve better than this, better than lies and betrayal." "There are no lies," I insisted, taking a step closer. "You are letting your anger cloud your judgment. The kids need both of us, and taking them away from me isn't the answer. We can figure this out together." But she let out a bitter laugh, finally turning to face me. Her eyes were red as if she'd been crying, but the tears had long since dried, leaving only the cold determination that had driven her to this point. "Together? There's no together anymore, Jack. Not after what you've done." "I didn't do anything," I shouted, the frustration and desperation spilling over. "There's nothing between me and the neighbor. It was just innocent conversation, nothing more. You're letting your imagination run wild, and now you're putting the kids in the middle of it." Lily's expression darkened, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I saw the way you looked at her, Jack. The way you smiled. The way you leaned in when you talked to her. You may not have slept with her, but don't you dare tell me there was nothing there. You were slipping away from me, piece by piece, and I had to do something before I lost you completely." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, I was stunned into silence. I could see now that this wasn't just about jealousy, it was about fear, insecurity, and the slow erosion of trust that had been happening right under my nose. But no matter how much she believed it, I couldn't let her actions go unchallenged. "Lily, you are wrong," I said, my voice softening as I reached out to her. I tried to reach her. "I never wanted to hurt you, and I never meant to make you feel like you were losing me. But what you are doing now isn't the way to fix things. It's only going to make everything worse." She shook her head, her resolve unshaken. "The damage is already done, Jack. There's nothing left to fix. The only thing I can do now is protect the kids from this mess." I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to lash out and let my anger take over, but I knew that wouldn't solve anything. I needed to stay calm and think clearly if I had any hope of finding my children and bringing them back home. "Where are they?" I asked again, my voice steady but with a sharp edge. "Tell me where you took them." Lily hesitated, her eyes flickering with a mix of emotions, anger, fear, guilt, but she remained silent. The longer she refused to answer, the more my anxiety grew. I needed to know they were safe, that they weren't being dragged into a situation they couldn't possibly understand. "If you don't tell me where they are," I said, stepping closer, "I'll have no choice but to call the police." "Is that what you want? To turn this into a legal battle? Because that's where we're headed if you keep this up." Her eyes flashed with anger at the mention of the police, but there was also a flicker of doubt, of hesitation. She knew the consequences of involving the authorities, how it could spiral out of control and affect the kids in ways neither of us wanted. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she sighed, the fight seeming to drain out of her. "They're with my friend Susan," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. I needed time to think, to figure out what to do next. "I wasn't trying to hurt you, Jack. I just needed space." A wave of relief washed over me at the mention of Susan, a mutual friend we'd known for years. At least I knew the kids were safe, that they weren't caught in the middle of this nightmare. "Susan?" I repeated, trying to keep my tone calm. "All right, I'll go get them. We can talk about everything else later, but I am bringing them home tonight." Lily nodded slowly, the fire in her eyes dimming as she seemed to realize just how far things had gone. "Fine," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "But don't think this is over, Jack. We still need to talk about what happens next." I didn't respond, too focused on getting out of there and bringing my kids back home where they belonged. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the cabin, my mind racing as I headed for the car. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the ground, and the air was thick with the scent of pine and earth. But all I could think about was getting to Susan's house, getting my children, and putting an end to this nightmare. I drove with a singular focus, the pain in my body and the chaos in my mind pushed aside by the need to protect my kids. I knew the road ahead was going to be long and difficult, but for now, all that mattered was getting them home. When I finally pulled up to Susan's house, I saw her standing on the porch, Jacob and Emma clinging to her side. Their faces lit up when they saw me. I felt a surge of emotion as I got out of the car and ran to them. I scooped them up in my arms, holding them tight. The relief was almost overwhelming. "Daddy," they both cried, their voices filled with a mix of confusion and joy. "Hey, you too," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Let's go home." Returning home with the kids was a bittersweet victory. The house felt emptier than before, despite their laughter filling the rooms. I knew this was just a temporary reprieve. The real battle was just beginning. As much as I wanted to shield them from the fallout of what was happening between Lily and me, it was impossible. The tension in the air was palpable, even if they didn't fully understand it. After getting the kids settled in, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my phone. I knew what I had to do. Lily's actions had crossed a line that couldn't be ignored. Taking the kids, the false accusations, the brutal setup in that restroom, it was clear that this situation was beyond repair. It was time to take legal action to fight for custody of my children and protect them from the chaos Lily was dragging them into. I contacted a lawyer the next morning, explaining everything that had happened, the neighbor, the accusations, the abduction of the kids, and the assault. My lawyer didn't sugarcoat things. This was going to be a nasty, drawn-out battle, but it was one I had to fight if I wanted to protect my children. We filed the necessary paperwork, seeking an emergency custody order and laying the groundwork for a divorce. The legal wheels were in motion, and I knew it was only a matter of time before Lily found out. I braced myself for the storm that was sure to follow. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. A few days later, after picking up the kids from school, I returned home to find a letter in the mail. It was from Lily's lawyer, a formal notification that she intended to contest the custody order. My hands shook as I read it, the cold, clinical language a stark contrast to the fury I knew was brewing on the other side. That evening, as I sat in the living room trying to distract myself with the kids' homework, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number, but the message was clear: "You're going to regret this, Jack." My blood ran cold as I stared at the words. I had no doubt who it was from. Lily had found out about the lawsuit, and now she was lashing out. But there was something more to this message, something that sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't just a threat, it was a promise of violence. The first sign of trouble came that night. I was in the kitchen cleaning up after dinner when I heard a noise outside, a soft thud followed by the unmistakable crunch of gravel underfoot. I moved to the window, peering out into the darkness, but saw nothing. Just as I was about to turn away, a shadow shifted near the edge of the driveway, and I caught the faint outline of a figure lurking near the trees. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Whoever it was, they were trying to stay hidden, watching the house. I grabbed my phone, dialing 911 with shaking hands as I backed away from the window. "There's someone outside," I whispered to the dispatcher. "I think they're watching the house." The police arrived within minutes, their flashing lights casting eerie shadows across the front yard. They searched the area but found no one. The officer I spoke to assured me they would patrol the neighborhood for the rest of the night, but I could tell he thought it was just a case of nerves, maybe someone passing by. But I knew better. This wasn't random, it was Lily's doing. She had sent someone to watch me, to scare me, maybe even worse. And I had no doubt who it was. The men who had attacked me in the restroom were more than just hired thugs, they had a connection to her, a hold over her that went deeper than I wanted to admit the following day. I went to the grocery store with the kids, trying to keep things as normal as possible, but as I walked down the aisles, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I turned a corner, I caught glimpses of familiar faces, menacing ones, the same guys who had attacked me. They weren't even trying to hide, they were just waiting, watching, making sure I knew they were there. I hurried the kids through the store, keeping them close to me as I rushed to check out. My hands were trembling as I paid for the groceries, and the moment we were outside, I was scanning the parking lot, trying to spot any threats. The drive home was tense, every car behind me a potential threat. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting one of them to follow me, but no one did. By the time we got home, I was on edge, my nerves frayed. I got the kids inside and locked every door and window, my mind racing with what could come next. That night, as the kids slept, I stayed awake, sitting in the darkened living room with a baseball bat by my side. I didn't know if it was enough to protect us if they decided to come back, but it was all I had. The minutes dragged on into hours, every creak of the house making me jump, every shadow outside the window a potential threat. Around midnight, the silence was shattered by the sound of glass breaking. My heart leaped into my throat as I grabbed the bat and ran toward the sound. The front window had been smashed, and a brick lay on the floor amid shattered glass. There was a note attached to it. I picked it up with trembling hands, unfolding the paper. The message was simple and chilling: drop the lawsuit or next time it will be just a brick. My breath caught in my throat as I looked out the broken window into the darkness beyond. They were out there, watching, waiting to see what I would do next. But despite the fear gripping me, I knew I couldn't back down. I had to protect my kids from whatever Lily was planning, even if it meant facing down these threats alone. I had no choice but to fight back, not just in court but against the danger closing in around us. After the brick smashed through the window, I knew I had to act quickly. The threats were intensifying, and it was clear that Lily's former partners, the same ones who had assaulted me, were not to be taken lightly. Staying in our home was no longer an option. I had to safeguard my children, which meant we needed to leave before things got any worse. The first step I took was to document everything meticulously. I photographed the broken window, the brick, the threatening note, and the signs of surveillance I'd observed over the past few days. Every time I spotted one of those men lurking, I made sure to capture a picture, even if it was a distant shot. I also filed police reports to ensure there was an official record of everything. My lawyer recommended keeping detailed notes, so I did just that. I recorded every threat, every encounter, and every incident. But I knew documentation alone wouldn't keep us safe. We needed to disappear before Lily could find us. That night, after the kids were asleep, I began making plans. I looked for distant locations, towns where we could start fresh and stay away from Lily's reach. The next morning, I arranged for a moving company under a different name to pack our essentials and send them to a rental house in a small town several states away. I kept the move secret, not even telling my closest friends or neighbors. The fewer people who knew, the better. I told the kids we were going on a special trip, trying to keep it as light and adventurous as possible. I didn't want to scare them more than necessary. They had seen the broken window and the brick, and even though I tried to downplay it, they sensed something was wrong. Within a couple of days, everything was in motion. I withdrew as much money as I could, enough to get us settled, and packed the car with our most important belongings. The movers would handle the rest once we were safely out of town. The kids helped pack, unaware of the true gravity of the situation. For them, it was just another part of the adventure. On the day we left, I took one last look around our house. It felt surreal to stand in those empty rooms, knowing we'd never return. But I knew this was the right choice, the only choice. I couldn't afford to be complacent with everything that had happened. As we drove away, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see one of those men following us, but the roads were clear, and the town slowly disappeared behind us. The tension in my shoulders eased with every mile, and the kids eventually fell asleep in the back seat, their faces calm and innocent. I glanced at them, feeling a mix of relief and sorrow. They didn't deserve this upheaval, and it pained me to know their lives had been disrupted by something they couldn't fully understand. We arrived in the new town late in the afternoon. It was a quiet place, where everyone seemed to know each other, and life moved at a slower pace. The house I had rented was small but cozy, situated at the end of a quiet street, surrounded by trees. It felt like a sanctuary where we could finally find some peace. The kids were excited as we arrived, their earlier confusion replaced by the excitement of exploring a new place. I let them run through the empty rooms, their laughter filling the space as they chose their new bedrooms. For the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to relax, even if just a little. In the following days, we settled into our new life. The movers arrived with our belongings, and we began the process of rebuilding from scratch. I enrolled the kids in the local school, careful not to divulge too much about our past. While we couldn't completely erase our history, I aimed to make it harder for Lily or her associates to track us down. Each night, after the kids were asleep, I reviewed the documentation I had gathered. My lawyer was handling the legal aspects, but being in a new place gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt in a long time. I knew the battle wasn't over. Lily would eventually find out, and the legal fight would continue. But for now, we were safe. As the weeks went by, life started to settle into a new rhythm. The kids adjusted to their new school, made new friends, and seemed to adapt better than I had hoped. I found a job at a local business, something low-key that kept me occupied without drawing too much attention. Despite the calm that had enveloped our lives, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were living on borrowed time. Lily wasn't one to give up easily, and the thought of her finding us still lingered in my mind. I knew I needed to be ready to protect my children from whatever came next. But for now, we had a chance to start over, to build something new while leaving the past behind. And I was determined to make the most of it, no matter what the future might bring.